Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the 14th episode of the story in which Naruto accomplished the impossible. You cannot stop the flow of time. Its will only rotates in one direction. A mere human cannot change that path. This story is from Dorsey. Please support him, her. She is also a digital artist, so please visit her profile. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. A battle of wills took place inside the Hokage's office, two fighters the only ones present. The defiant individuals had been trying to force submission on the other. They were completely uncompromising, which only made their situation worse. Naruto stubbornly refused to let go, staring into Jiraiya's narrowed eyes, his azure pools hardened with obstinacy and another emotion the sage couldn't define. The soundless fight ended with the older's defeat, throwing his arms high into the air with a frustrated snort. "Why the hell are you protecting that guy?" Naruto raised an eyebrow, repeating the verb with a hushed tone. "Protecting?" His face twisted into a scandalized grimace like the whole idea was turning his stomach upside down. "I'm not protecting him." "Yes, you are." Jiraiya snapped, clenching his hands into fists, but he received no real answer, only narrowed eyes with a hard edge. The sage let out a sigh in the hope that it would ease away some of his frustration. Well, it didn't. So he tried another tactic. "Look, Naruto. We have to know every single detail about that night, and that includes his identity. You know who he is. Just tell me, and I promise I won't tell anyone else." "And what if I don't want you to know?" Naruto's voice was cold, but his pleading eyes told a different tale in Jiraiya's head. "Don't ask because I don't want to hurt you." The sage shook off the echoing voice in his mind and sunk deep into the sofa beside the wall, burying his face into one of his hands. "I know you're trying to keep us safe, but it'll do no good. I don't care if a ghost or even Kakashi is lurking behind that mask, but we have to know. Your family's life is on the line, and you still don't understand the seriousness of this. It's as if you don't want to change it." Jiraiya glanced between his fingers at the tense teen, his eyes widening for a fraction and visible dread rushing over his face. You don't want to save them," the sage breathed in horror, not really sure of the emotion that had flashed through Naruto's face a second ago. "You think I'm just going to stand to the side after all of this shit and watch as he does it again?" Naruto whispered with total disbelief. Fury rose in his gut, nearly obliterating his rational mind before it miraculously settled down. With a snort, he released the tension, and he folded his arms in front of his chest, turning away from his godfather with an unreadable expression. "Don't try to manipulate my emotions for another slip, you pervert. It worked once, but it won't work again." Before the situation could escalate into another battle, this time with real weapons, another person flashed into the office and raised an eyebrow at the scene. His son was silently sulking, and his sensei looked disappointed beyond words. Minato shook his head with an exasperated sigh. "Do I even want to know?" Naruto let out another snort and squeezed his arms around himself. Minato shook his head once more. This time his voice serious without the previous cheeky tone. "Come, Naruto. She's waiting for us." The blonde boy slowly turned, and the previous strain was gone. Actually, he looked ready to faint like all of his bones had suddenly vanished. One tiny poke would be enough to make the suddenly pale boy drop to the ground. With a gulp, Naruto nodded. "He'll do it. Definitely. For sure. Somehow." Uzumaki Kushina silently sat on the long couch with a very troubled Minato by her side, and a fidgeting younger blonde in the armchair opposite her. Jiraiya silently occupied an empty corner, his eyes closed, disregarding everything around him. He was sulking. "Yeah." Kushina made an imaginary nod. Her arms unconsciously traveled toward her round tummy to cup it up and down. She raised her eyebrow in suspicion, her gaze flickering between the two blondes until it settled down on the younger one. And once more, oh, why the hell should I go to meditate? Naruto glanced up at his father, who gave him a reassuring nod. Bracing himself, his eyes hardened with a new light before exhaling. Just trust in me, please. Kushina didn't respond, only her brows furrowed, and her eyes narrowed slightly. A second later, she let out a defeated sigh and closed her eyes to drift away from reality as Naruto had told her. Unnoticed by her, the blonde boy did the same. The outside noises slowly faded, then disappeared entirely to be replaced by a disturbing tinkling. Chains. Even if she didn't have to, she still raised her head high and slowly opened her eyes to glance up at her captive and his restraints to verify it. The beast was still there, chained up and still glaring daggers at her. She narrowed her eyes when she noticed something odd. The fox was glaring behind her and not at her. The redhead followed her instincts and immediately swung around, raising her fist as soon as she sensed someone else behind her. But her attack couldn't reach its target. An iron grip stopped the motion midair. However, she also restrained its power as soon as she identified the man in front of her. Kushina immediately relaxed, and the grip disappeared from her wrist. Her eyes intensely searched the others. The intruder's piercing blue eyes were glued on the frowning Kyuubi behind her. "Why did you want to speak with me here so much?" Kushina demanded impatiently as she took a step forward. Uncertain eyes drifted toward her, silently observing the soft features until she became weary. Naruto glanced up one last time at the fox and took a step to the side, his eyes staring unfocused at the yellowish void. Kurama. Kushina's brows moved into one coherent line. What was that? Electric blue pools drifted back upwards to the fox. You wanted to know which bijou I had been hosting. His name is Kurama, he answered softly, his gaze still holding the foxes behind Kushina. So the time has come to reveal your true identity? The Kyuubi's voice boomed over the place, his enormous crimson pool scanning Naruto's face with a puzzled glint. It actually looked somewhat amused. Truth has a cost, little human. A small, sincere smile formed on his lips. Secrets have their own. Even greater. The giant bijou didn't answer, but he let his eyes drift on an empty spot behind the blonde. Kushina suddenly stilled, unaware of the fox's reaction. Her eyes widened, and her heart rate increasing as the air shimmered and shifted behind the blonde. Orange fur took shape, giant paws and sharp fangs evolved until the whole tremendous form appeared gradually from the bits. With time, Kushina faced an identical version of her own captive. There were only 3 differences. 1, the new one was significantly smaller. But that didn't mean that it couldn't have eradicated complete districts with a swing of its tail if it wanted to. Second, which was the most frightening aspect of the 3 yet still not the most disturbing, was that the fox was completely free. There were no chains, no stakes, nothing to hinder it from a bloody rampage. The enormous specimen was only steps from her, free from any restraints. She could hear its slow and calm breathing, the soft ruffling of its fur as it shifted with each inhale and exhale. And she could also hear its drumming heart. The beat was steady, calm. Maybe a little bit faster thanks to its excitement. But the most disturbing thing, however, was the look in its eyes. The warm, nostalgic glint in the crimson orbs as they were scrutinizing her while she still couldn't even move a finger. Uzumaki Kushina, it suddenly boomed and opened its mouth to say more, but it didn't get an opportunity. Her blonde companion let out a sigh and shook his head slowly. Nice and dramatic performance, Kurama. I almost got chills. Kushina's eyes went even wider when he finally turned and took a step toward the smaller fox, which also shifted his weight. From Kushina's point of view, it definitely looked threatening. The way the fox slightly turned, slowly raising its paw with the acute claws to ready them to dash out and cut him into half. Without thinking, golden chakra chains shot out from her, efficiently restraining the until now unfettered bijou. The metallic links were twisting around his suddenly still form, his neck and limbs, one at his chest, dragging the enormous body to the ground until it smashed into the ground with a loud boom. Naruto, however, had been stoically observing the scene, and his only visible reaction was a raised amused eyebrow. But his composure soon faltered as his shoulders started to tremble by restrained laughter. And his what had been restraining his snicker, shattered into millions of pieces when Kurama tried to raise but failed miserably, because his mouth shut with a heavy snap when his body had smashed against the floor once more despite his best effort. Naruto's loud guffaws echoed in the empty void for long minutes. "What the hell are you laughing at, brat?" It snarled, struggling against the bonds, but the voice held no malice. It sounded more embarrassed than vicious. Crimson eyes flared with annoyance instead of rage, and Kushina hesitated for a second. Not more than a fraction of a heartbeat, but the chains loosened, and in the next moment the bijou was free, links snapped one by one, and the web disappeared from his body. Kushina narrowed her eyes and tensed her muscles, ready to shoot another set of the golden technique, but a slow movement caught her eyes and made her stop. It was Naruto, slowly turning to step next to the creature. She instinctively reached out, and this time it was her who grabbed his wrist and yanked him back. Naruto's eyes drifted from his secured arm up to Kushina's, and he smiled. "Everything's going to be all right." Her eyes suspiciously darted on his features, looking for any trace of a lie, but she found none. Her head bent down in a weak nod, her hold gradually loosening with the motion, and Naruto slipped out of her grip to confidently walk to the fox's side. Kurama's lips curled back, revealing a set of his fangs, each longer than Kushina. A low growl echoed in the nothingness for long seconds while the boy finally reached the bijou, which only continued gnashing its teeth. His hands brushed over the soft fur of a paw while he passed by it, but the Kyuubi didn't move or draw away from the touch, only his snarl lessened. Kushina's every nerve screamed for escape, to bolt out of her mindscape and grab the blonde on the way into safe reality and bed herself in Minato's arms. But her curiosity and her stubbornness were stronger than her instincts. So she waited. "He's Kurama. I'm housing the almighty nine-tailed demon fox." Naruto awkwardly motioned up. "Or a version of him." With time, he glanced up to seek verification, which actually came in the form of a small nod. And what happened next amused Kushina enough to let her mouth fall open. The giant entity raised a paw and flipped him on the head. The blonde growled, desperately nursing his crown, but he still got the strength to punch the fox's feet, his features scrunching up with an annoyed grimace. They were bickering. She mused silently. "Hey! What was that for?" For being an idiot, the bijou snapped, and shoot a pointed glare, but not toward Naruto but toward Kushina, who flinched a step backward. "What kind of version?" Kushina demanded, her eyes narrowing at Naruto. But it wasn't he who answered the question. "A version from the future." "Yeah, or a bastard version of him," he corrected playfully, punching once again the giant paw. Kurama's narrowed eyes drifted down to Naruto's crown disapprovingly, and he could feel the stabbing glare clearly on himself. "Sorry," he mumbled, and the skin smoothened as his composure became serious. Kurama let the mood sink, before he had spoken. "We're here most likely thanks to a spacetime ninjutsu." Orangish fur furrowed on his forehead, concentrating his attention entirely on the still woman. "When I said, we, do you know what I meant, Kushina? Do you know now who is this boy really is?" The redhead didn't answer immediately, her eyes glued on the silent form of the blonde as he restlessly shifted from foot to foot. With time, she took one hesitant step toward the fidgeting boy, her eyes drifting upward. Kurama held her gaze for a fraction of a second before he made a small, encouraging motion with his head. Even Kushina surprised herself when she actually took another step after that motion, but her first feeling wasn't suspicion like any other time the Kyuubi had indicated anything. It was excitement. Then she had made another, more steady step. The third and the fourth would have looked almost confident if her eyes hadn't drifted upward to make sure that the fox hadn't moved from its previous place, due to the remains of her still protesting instincts. But on a whim, she tossed them to the side and bolted. In the next blink, Naruto found himself inside a crushing hug. Strong arms held him steadily with the promise that if they released him, the word would shatter, just like his bones if he even twitched. Another squeeze and the air was out from his lungs. But he didn't protest, he didn't struggle. He enjoyed it. It was a masochistic act because, despite the fact that it did actually hurt, he welcomed the sensation with all of his heart. I thought it was a dream, Kushina mumbled, but it was real then. You're Naruto. Her grip tightened, then softened a fraction. Naruto utilized the slip to raise and fold his own arms around her back to give her a small squeeze. You knew? How? He whispered with equal softness, inhaling her faint, but still sweet, vanilla smell. She stilled in his arms but almost immediately relaxed. I eavesdropped, she paused before continuing. Once, when you had visited the Kyubi. I had remembered a dream when you were sitting on its head. You know, the one when the Sandaime appeared in green spandex at the end. And days later during one of my dreams. She stopped once more, before a small awkward giggle escaped her lips. You know, I was swimming in a bowl of ramen and next I found myself inside my seal, she mumbled and stopped, her eyes squeezing shut. And I spotted you again, you were talking about your past. And your Kyubi addressed you and... Sorry about the secrecy, he exhaled slowly, placing a small kiss on her temple. It's okay. She finally took a step backward, but her hands still cupped his face. She brushed a tuft aside to look straight into his pools. I'm glad you finally decided to open up. It actually wasn't intentional. He half-heartedly shrugged, glancing upward to send a set of imaginary daggers toward Kurama. But now, I'm actually glad it happened, you know? She suddenly stilled when a new realization hit her. The fox. Why he is free. His name's Kurama. And he isn't that bad of a guy, if you know him. He's my partner, you know? Her eyes widened and immediately drifted upward, then behind her back, where the bigger version silently observed the scene. But his lips were still twisted into a disapproving snarl. Slowly, she made her decision and nodded in understanding. If you say so, then I'll also trust in him. It went better than with your father, I guess, Kurama boomed with an obvious, amused edge in his voice. Why? What happened with Minato? Kushina curiously glanced upward also, but she had to take some steps backward to actually catch a glimpse of the searching crimson pools. Her only answer was a wide, maybe a bit sadistic smirk from Kurama. And she definitely didn't like that. She couldn't shake off the feeling that this comment was the start of his payback for her chakra-chained attack. Naruto sat atop his father's stone head on the monument, staring out at the sleeping village. The sky had been steadily brightening for about 30 minutes, though the sun was still behind the distant mountains. Nature was stirring but not yet fully awake as a bird chirped, and a few bushes rustled. His bed had tossed him out when the night was still dark, and the dim gray of the early morning was still far. He retreated to his well-known place where he could do whatever he wanted, mostly just sitting, staring at his beloved village, silently watching over her like a guardian of fire. It was peaceful break in the crisp early morning, a nice change from the chaos that had been plaguing his life in the last days. He sat there, eyes closed, letting his thoughts fade away as time drifted on, and nature began to wake. It felt good to just sit, doing absolutely nothing, no thinking or worrying over anything. The sun suddenly appeared over the horizon, bombarding him with warm glowing rays. He leaned back, allowing the golden shafts to gently warm his body, ease his weariness and soothe his soul. Naruto inhaled slowly, then exhaled, releasing the tension that had been building in his muscles over the last several weeks, inviting the calm serenity of his surroundings to seep into the very fiber of his being. He remained like that for an unknown amount of time before a familiar chakra signature appeared in the peripheral of his senses. The blonde let out a small, non-committal sigh. A few minutes later, Hiruzen materialized from the shadows, making a polite amount of noise, though it wasn't necessary, and meandered his way over to the edge of the monument to take in the elegant beauty of the village below. A companionable silence rested between them as both stared out at their beloved home. An invincible sense of curiosity began to prickle Naruto's mind, threatening his serenity, but he pushed it back. There was no way he was giving up this wonderful peace. He'd wait for the old man to make the first step, and this time, it wouldn't be him to rush head first into any situation. And his intuition was right. The old leader made the first step with his next exhale. Peaceful. Isn't it? The once Kage said slowly, chewing on the words and on the end of his pipe. It was more of a statement than a question, but Naruto nodded and answered anyway, a smile forming on his face as he gazed fondly across the village. Yes. Silence reigned once again, and several long minutes passed with no response from Hiruzen. Naruto began to wonder if their conversation would even continue as he let his eyes wander from building to building. The air around them was losing its frosty bite in the sunlight, a woodpecker starting to rap on a tree in the distance, giving a faint and rhythmical background music. Soon, more species joined to nature's base, the drumbeat was augmented with the chorus of birds. A lonely cricket joined as a solo violin player, and the rustling leaves harp made the symphony perfect. Torakuken, you have given me a fine jigsaw, Sarutobi finally began some time later. Naruto blinked, then inclined his head, inviting his companion to continue with a slight tension in his shoulders. It was more out of curiosity than anxiety. He had nothing to lose anymore. And it felt good. He was finally at complete ease. He didn't even bother trying to get a word in as Hiruzen paused, he decided to just listen. Actually, he was curious to see where this conversation would end up. When I exhausted every possible trail I could think of, I returned to the beginning when you were first brought to the hospital, hoping I could remember something that might shed some light on your existence. When you first appeared in Konoha, you seemed to recognize me, the Sandaime said, choosing his words with care. And not only me, but Minato as well. At first, I thought our reputations had preceded us. But your reactions told a different story. Let's start with Minato. According to him, when he threatened you in that hospital hallway, you didn't pause or even blink. Instead you retorted immediately, brushing him off with no regard for your own safety. But that wasn't what really had me wondering. It was the fact that there was no fear in your eyes, absolutely none. I'd never seen an enemy shinobi able to hide their fear at the sight of Minato. But you, not only did you not show any fear, you showed sadness and caring, the exact opposite of what a complete stranger would be showing. So, I figured that Minato must have a doppelganger out there, but then I realized that I would have heard of such a person. A highly skilled shinobi with blonde hair. Sarutobi gave a pointed look. That includes you. With the strength you possess and your likeness to Minato, I'm sure I would have learned of your existence well before you crash-landed in that training field. But I hadn't. Nor had Jiraiya, even with his extensive spy network. I thought to myself, how is it possible for this boy to exist for so long without our knowledge? I remembered the shock you'd shown upon seeing me. But you weren't just shocked, you were dumbfounded. It was as if you were staring at a dead man walking. And, since I had exhausted every other possible trail I could think of, I considered that maybe you were seeing a dead man walking. I mulled over what that could mean, but could find no logical explanation for it. Eventually, I decided to simply watch and wait for you to reveal more of yourself, but the more you became a part of the village, the less sense my theories made, at least, until yesterday. It wasn't a very logical line of thinking, but I had exhausted all other options, so I decided to entertain the thought. I assumed you'd known me where you came from, and if I assumed the same for Minato, then your reaction to the both of us made sense. Expanding on that reasoning, I wondered what situation would have to occur for this to be true. Do you know what I concluded? Hiruzen didn't actually wait for an answer, pinning the blonde with a serious gaze. Nothing. Until finding one more puzzle piece, thanks to Noara Rin and Orochimaru. A sour grimace spread across the old leader's face, but he brushed his wandering thoughts aside. My late student made a blood test we hadn't conducted back then. Why would we have? It would have been so illogical. But it revealed that you had one more relative here in Konoha. And with that missing piece, it finally clicked. Hiruzen's face gradually softened, and a smile tugged his lips upward, deepening the starting wrinkles at the edge of his mouth. Your whisker marks. Sarutobi pointed toward his cheeks. I'd heard about Kinkaku and Ginkaku when I was only a teenager. The tale said they'd gotten the same markings. It's because of the Kyuubi's influence. I've always known that if Minato and Kushina had a child, he or she would be a genius, but never in my wildest dreams I would have thought about what you, my child, have achieved. A rip in the space-time continuum. Time travel. Naruto stared, wide-eyed, unable to say anything. What could he say? So instead of saying anything, he started laughing. Hard. Loudly. And for a long time. Loosely, without any control. And it felt so good that it was hard to stop. But it slowly died down anyway. Gigi. You're really the professor, aren't you? Hiruzen shrugged with a small smile and gracefully settled down next to the blonde boy. With decades of experience, his fingers fluidly flipped his small tobacco box open, and in seconds, faint bluish smoke enveloped their sitting forms. What about a proper introduction this time, Gigi? The blonde turned toward his companion with a wide and foxy grin. Hiruzen only let out a soft chuckle and shook his head. You've turned into a real fine man, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened and his mouth dropped open. How? How the hell do you know my real name? The Hokage let out another chuckle and lowered his pipe. I know that Minato had chosen that name. And since Kushina is the last of her clan, you should have had her surname instead of Minato. Even if he had become the fourth Hokage, the subsistence of the Uzumaki clan is more important than to carry on the surname of a small Konoha family. Naruto hesitantly nodded at the explanation, but in the end shook his head, his eyes darting back to the rooftops of the village. It must be hard. Being near them, but they not knowing who you are. It was, Naruto admitted, his eyes trailing back to Sarutobi. But the serious answer faltered as a cheeky smile appeared on Naruto's face. But you know, Gigi, you're late with your revelation. Oh? Hiruzen inhaled out, together with a lungful of smoke. So you've already told them? Well, let's say that they figured it out. The blonde scratched the back of his head, but his grin never faltered. I guess it is better this way. Sarutobi stated, his gaze lingering on the blonde beside him. The once leader let out a long sigh. Who raised you, Naruto? The teen didn't answer, his fingers trailing a small crack next to him to gain some time. Mostly myself. My birth went wrong. There was an uncomfortable silence before the Sandaime cleared his throat. And Jiraiya? Where was he during your childhood? His only answer was a shrug. Another long sigh escaped Sarutobi. I'm sorry. For what? Naruto looked up, his eyes and fingers still scanning the crack. For prohibiting him from raising you. Naruto's brow furrowed, but he still avoiding eye contact, so the once Hokage continued. Around a month ago, he and I had a talk about the worst-case scenario. About what would happen if Kushina's seal broke, and Minato was gone. It seems for once Jiraiya really followed my orders despite what his heart had said to him. He argued like a maniac. Naruto didn't make any comment, but he did store this information. And it finally settled down some of his thoughts about where the hell his godfather was during his childhood. He had thought Jiraiya was just like that. The sometimes unreasonable perv, and Sarutobi had thought it would be better if he avoided him until he could take care of his own sanity. But it seems it was the ninja system that ruined his childhood. It wasn't Jiraiya. It was the fact that Jiraiya followed orders. Orders that left him alone. Orders that prohibited Jiraiya to seek him out before he was ready to defend himself. It was because of the circle of hatred that he had no one to turn to during a sleepless night. It was because of that he had nobody at home he could turn to. And for the first time in his life, he hated this corrupted system that could make a child lonely. That could shatter families. That could make a child kill an entire clan. His own family. His father was right. The current shinobi system only fueled the circle, and he vowed to break that problem at its roots. Hiruzen's voice kicked him out from his internal musing before he could dive deeper. What about Kakashi? Do you want to tell him the truth? Naruto hesitated for a fraction before he shook his head. No, I respect the man. Who he will become, but he is not the same now. I would break him, and he's already broken enough after losing Rin. He shook his head once more. I don't want to shatter him. Right now he's confused enough. Another tiff of the smoke left Hiruzen's body, the soft mist dancing in the unmoving air around them. The light flickered on its surface from time to time, revealing the hidden beautiful dance. You like sitting here? Yeah, he mused internally. And why does he actually do this? Because it's peaceful here? Because everything seems much clearer from here? His problems seemed as far away and as small as the small dots of the villagers from above. Or was it maybe because of the height? Was it because of the reassurance that Konoha was indeed still there every time he had looked down on the village? Naruto's eyes drifted toward the center, a soft sincere smile lingering on his lips. It gives me reassurance. Seeing Konoha safe and sound day by day. No words were exchanged for another long moment. Both men let their gazes rest on the village under their feet, one still looking for reassurance that it won't be gone in the next second, slipping through his fingers if he dare to blink, and the other out of simple habit, or more likely, respecting the other's feelings. A new presence stepped through the limits of their senses, and Naruto immediately flung his head toward the newcomer with a raised eyebrow. Jiraiya strolled into the scene, his cheeks flushed, and his steps faltered from time to time while he tiffed from a sake bottle. It was a long journey for the sage, wobbling from tree to tree, resting between every other one. The toad summoner sloppily hopped between the two sitting men, pushing them toward the edge. Only the chakra that Naruto and the once leader tapped into restrained them from falling from Minato's stone head face down on the crowded square. But Jiraiya wasn't bothering with these kind of tiny things like their safety. He enthusiastically flung his arm around Naruto's head, and to the blonde's biggest annoyance, he immediately imprisoned him in a headlock, ruffling his blonde mess constantly. But Naruto wasn't giving himself up easily. He was finally able to struggle out from the iron grip with a well-aimed punch at his godfather's gut, but Jiraiya only let out a bark of laughter, tossing his pain to the side. Hey! What the hell are you doing, Ero Sennin? Naruto grumbled while desperately trying to bring his lock back into proper shape. Well, he failed. Miserably. He sent another set of imaginary daggers toward the still giggling, white-haired man and shot a questioning glance at the stoically puffing Sandaime. But he got no help from him. He just shrugged and let out a puff of smoke. Jiraiya finally steadied himself, but the goofy smile never left his face. Hey, old man. Can I tell you a secret? Even if he had asked, the Sannin gave him no opportunity. My godson will be so badass. Just like me. Hiruzen irked an amused eyebrow and cocked his head to the side. Oh? And how would you know that? I just know because I'm awesome. He'll be smart and strong, and he'll kick the bad guy's ass just like me. Drop the act, pervert. He figured it out all on his own, Naruto muttered, his arms folding in front of his chest. What? You've ruined my game. I wanted to tease you more. Why the hell are you so damn smart? Jiraiya's shouts died down to annoyed muttering. The familiar pout was soon on his lips, and the man eventually folded his arms in front of his chest. Sarutobi shook his head at his obviously sulking, grown-up student. His gaze flickered toward Naruto, and his face softened. You know what? I think you are right, Jiraiya. Your godson will be a very fine man when he grows up. Don't you agree, Naruto-kun? But the named blonde was too occupied to hide his embarrassment and his flaming cheeks to answer. Jiraiya hummed and swung his arms once more around the flushing teen with a wide grin on his face. But this time, Naruto didn't get the urge to free himself when his godfather viciously ruffled his untidy crown. Sarutobi let out a loud chuckle, slowly straightening from the ground and brushing down some invisible dirt from his flawless attire. I think that was more than enough excitement for me today. None of the others protested. Slowly shaking his head, the Sandaime disappeared in the same way that he had arrived. The Toad Sage grinned widely while releasing his hold on Naruto, his fingers already searching inside his pouch. Well, this actually makes things easier. At least I won't have to explain this to the old geezer. With that, he raised his hand to reveal a small scroll in it. Naruto suspiciously eyed the storage scroll, and when his godfather indicated with his head, he carefully grabbed it and turned over several times. What's this? A gift. I thought you've been missing it. The blonde's brows moved into one coherent line as his eyes scanned through the closing seal. It wasn't a tricky one. With a flicker of his chakra, the seal had opened, and another scroll fell into his lap. However, it was significantly bigger, almost half his own size. And it was heavy. Naruto's eyes immediately widened when he recognized the chiseled ornament on both sides. He made one side glance at Jiraiya, and when he got one more encouraging nod, he enthusiastically rolled it open in front of him. The soft breeze ruffled the edge, but Naruto's hands held it steadily. Azure eyes darted from names to names on the ancient old surface until he found Jiraiya's and his father's names at the end. Go on, Gaki. As long as I know, you've got every right to have your name on it. A wide grin spread across Naruto's face, and with an enthusiastic nod, he immediately bit his thumb. Experienced fingers danced across the fine fabric, tidy, perfect lines forming from the finest ink, from his own blood. Within seconds, the Toad's summoning contract was blessed with one more name, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto immediately smeared his still leaking blood on his palm, and his hands were already forming the samist hand signs, when an iron grip on his wrist stopped him from moving further in the progress. The blonde quirked an eyebrow at the frowning pervert and cocked his head. If you're going to summon anyone, you should do it where you've got space. I can easily imagine that you were about to summon Gamabunta on top of the Hokage monument. Naruto was silent, but his eyebrow twitched with irritation. I'm not that big of an idiot. He tore his hand free and continued with his summon at a much slower pace. But a small trail of sweat slowly dripped down from his temple. He actually really wanted to show off. When he finished the last hand sign, he slammed his palm onto the hard stone with ease, eagerly waiting for the soft, chakra-enchained smoke to finally die down over the still visible, obsidian seal array. It happened when the breeze grabbed the soft dust and tossed it to the side to reveal a tadpole. A confused grimace disfigured Naruto's face while Jiraiya's loud guffaws echoed over the village. A nearby lurking Anbu perked up at the booming laughter, only to shake his head slowly in disapproval. He was pretty sure that sitting on the Yondaime's stone head was prohibited. But who was he to tell the very man's brother and one of the Sannin that they were breaking the rules? The masked soldier shook his head once more and continued on his way toward his destination. Naruto leaned closer to the struggling, tiny little thing, and his brows furrowed, disregarding Jiraiya's snicker in the background. He surely used the necessary amount of chakra. He did find the faint chakra signature he was looking for. He leaned even closer until his nose was only centimeters from the trashing thing when his eyes widened in realization. Gamakichi. The tiny creature stilled, and Naruto would have sworn that it blinked up at him in surprise. Then the toddler toad puffed out from existence. Naruto straightened, his nose scrunching up with annoyance as his godfather's laughter slowly became hysterical. "Oh, shut up. I did want to summon him, but I thought he would be bigger." But his words did no good. The toad summoner, instead, bent over in his laughter and rolled to his side, slowly wheeling toward the edge of the enormous monument. Naruto perked up, and with a slight kick, he helped his godfather gather some momentum and cover the remaining distance to the edge in a second. It took a full 10 seconds for Jiraiya to stomp back to the top. His face was red, and his shoulders still trembled from the strain as he had found a hold on Minato's nose at the last second to stop him from falling off the Hokage monument. If it had happened above a female bathhouse, he wouldn't have gotten any complaints for splashing into the circle of nude women. But seeing Naruto's smug face, a vein started to bulge out of his forehead. A wide, cheeky grin spread across Naruto's face, his lips parting, and his tongue slipped out in a childish manner. With a flicker of his chakra, Jiraiya bolted toward the already fleeing blonde. But at least the Sannin still had enough composure to grab the summoning scroll as he rushed beside it in his hurry to chase down his godson. The house went still after each of its tenants finally retreated back to their rooms. It was long hours ago. The next morning was closer than midnight. No sound could be heard besides the soft, rhythmical breathing of the sleeping family members. Only one of them couldn't find any sleep. The oldest, Namake's Minato, silently munched his late snack, a lukewarm cup of instant ramen. It was pretty hot half an hour ago, when he had actually made it, but his appetite was gone after the first bites. Minato unconsciously stirred the soup, making the soaked noodles slowly whirl inside the cup. He thought about nothing, his mind was empty, which was actually surprising after the hellish previous week. It wasn't an everyday occasion when your brother turned out to be your almost grown-up son. But actually, it hadn't been bothering him that much. Well, yeah, it did bother him in some ways, but he was glad because he knew now that his son would grow up to be a fine man. And his past? Or future? Or whatever. He was sure as hell that he wouldn't let it happen again. Not in the same way. Because he would save Kushina. He would save Naruto from his fate. However, there was one tiny little flaw in his logic. Naruto refused to share more info about that night. And more particularly, about the masked man. He had told them his abilities, about his Sharingan, his fighting style, but he had been refusing to tell them his identity. With a sigh, Minato let the thought slip before he could dig deeper. All the theories he and Jiraiya had made up about the masked man and the billion consequences his son's time travel would do made his head spin and his mind dizzy. With a groan, Minato pushed the almost untouched cup to the side and slumped on the table, resting his head on one straight arm. He eyed the ramen cup for some time, his head strangely empty. But he got tired of staring at the goofily grinning cartoon kid on the side of the plastic very soon. With a frustrated snort, he pushed himself up and headed to his bedroom, determined to have at least an hour of sleep before he actually had to head off to work. The passage was dark, but thanks to the faint light, he could see where he was going. His eyes brushed over his brother's. No. He shook his head. Naruto's room, he corrected himself. And the sight made him stop. A faint strip of light escaped under the closed door. His ears twitched, trying to strengthen his ears in the hope that he could pick up any noise. But he caught only Naruto's weak snoring. A small smile creaked his lips upward, and without any second thought, he carefully pushed the door open to sneak a peek at his son. Only to be sure that he hadn't disappeared. And indeed, his son was there, spread-eagled all over the bed, occupying every single available corner he could. And those that he could not reach physically, those parts were filled with his rumpled bedsheet, an unsteadily balancing ink bottle, and a scroll running through half of his room from his bed. Minato couldn't help himself, muffled laughter escaped his lips. But he immediately shut his mouth when Naruto stilled, then slightly turned, stretching even more. But his worries wore away when Naruto continued to slumber with a slightly louder snore. The Hokage inched closer to free the blanket under Naruto's leg and put it back in its proper place atop the still snoring teen. His eyes caught a glimpse of his abdomen between his boxer and t-shirt, and he froze mid-motion. Morbid curiosity rose inside his veins. He tried to push it to the side, suppress it, but he failed. The feeling continued to nudge him more aggressively with each passing second while he couldn't tear his gaze from the unveiled tummy, still holding the blanket half over the teen. With a gulp, he made his decision. His hand gradually lowered the blanket, careful to not disturb his son's sleep. Shaky hands traveled toward the loose t-shirt, a finger slipping under the fabric to push it further. A flicker of chakra. The boy stilled. An ebony-black swirl evolved slowly, ruling the pale skin in the faint light of the reading lamp. Minato only stared, his eyes wide, his mouth had long fallen open. Another shaky hand rose, his fingertips this time strolling over the pattern. It pulsed once, and it slowly started to fade. With a rush of adrenaline and desperation, Minato pushed another dose of his essence into the seal. And something unexpected happened. 1 second, he was there, leaning above his son, examining his seal, his own masterpiece, and the next moment, he blinked and opened his eyes to find himself staring into a yellowish void. The yellow flash took a step backward, his pools swinging from side to map his suddenly unfamiliar surroundings. There was a twitch in his chakra, a kind of sparkle. Minato suddenly stilled. Adrenaline rushed through his veins when something started to materialize in front of him. And he had frozen completely when a man took shape in front of him. Identical azure eyes bore into his own, one with shock, the other with an understanding soft glint. A long white coat framed a body over a jounin vest and the familiar navy blue shinobi pants and shirt. Untamable golden locks swayed in the soft breeze that ruffled his own in the same way. An exact copy of himself stood in front of him, doing nothing, only observing him with a small, understanding smile. "What the dash?" Minato finally mouthed faintly. "I think the question I would be looking for is, how?" The copy tried to joke, an awkward grin on his face. However, the grin faded into a serious expression that made Minato wince. "That's easy. Similar chakra resonates." The copy paused, waiting for the other to react, but when nothing came in response, he continued his explanation. "I had used up every bit of my remaining chakra by reforging Naruto's seal during Pain's invasion. I thought I was gone, this time forever. But it seems you had pushed enough of your own to reanimate me once more. Like a shock or something like that. You know, similar to CPR or something." The copy made a wandering face and shrugged. A long, stretched staring contest had begun that made even the copy start uneasily shifting from foot to foot. Finally, the tension broke. A small chuckle bubbled out from the younger Minato's lips, and with one more minute, it advanced into foolhardy laughter, his form shaking while tears escaped behind his eyelashes. He raised his hand to wipe them away as his snicker died down completely, but one or two small chuckles managed to come by from time, to the copy's annoyance. "Have you finished?" His only answer was another snicker, but this time, something tugged the replica's mouth upward into an identical, foxy grin. He is awesome, isn't he?" Minato nodded between two laughters and finally gathered himself. Wiping the last remains of his previous laughing session from his face, he straightened and turned. Traveling through time, saving people from fate, turning the Kyuubi into his friend. The Hokage shook his head, a wide grin plastered on his face. Making me meet a version of me from the future. He exhaled and shook his head once more, the smile slowly fading to swap places with a sour grimace. But he still withholds things from us. So I hope I'll have my answers from you. I assume you can sense what's happening outside. His gaze hardened as he raised it to tear into his counterpart. Who is the masked man? His copy didn't answer, but Minato noticed his own motion when he was hesitating. Chewing his lower lip was his own custom habit. It went unnoticeable for almost everyone else, beside his closest friends, but now he could clearly see the annoying tick. Minato straightened and narrowed his now flaming eyes, his whole composure screaming authority. But it did no good with his mirror image. His eyes were calmly observing him, despite the familiar habit. He wanted to protect you, you know, he whispered. Just tell me, damn it. I can bear it. Minato snapped, taking a step toward his replica. I'm sure it's someone I know. Hell, I even considered Kakashi for a moment. Tell me, or I'm going to go crazy. The copy still hadn't said a word, so Minato tried another tactic. He tossed his authority to the side, his face softening this time. Please. If you're me, you know I have to know. I have to save them. And for that, I need information. The copy, this time, did react by letting out a sigh and lowering his head slightly in defeat. Then in the next second, he collected his composure by running a hand through his hair. Naruto still thinks he can save him. Save who? Minato asked, his eyes narrowing. Toby. Why? Why does he care for him? Minato asked, his eyes narrowing even more. The copy paused for a second before his mouth turned up into a mischievous smile. Do you know what an anagram is? Ah yes, but what does that have to do with dash, just think about it. The copy sent another cheeky grin before his eyes suddenly drifted to the side, his ears pricking a little. His form looked shakier with each moment. His grin faded into a soft smile as his form turned foggier. And tell Naruto that I'm proud of him beyond words. I'm proud of what he has achieved. Even if this piece is not as real as we think it is. With that final exhale, the echo of the person was gone just as fast as it came back to life. And this time forever. Kurama silently observed the exchange between the two blondes, giving them enough privacy but still keeping an eye, or more likely an ear on their conversation. The fox narrowed his crimson eyes, and his ears twitched before the echo faded back to where it came from. He had felt the faint, almost insensible chakra that lingered inside the seal. But he had never thought about this possibility. His mind drifted back to the conversation, his eyes narrowing once more before tossing the ghost Minato's strange remark to the side. Minato shakily returned to reality. Blinking twice, he realized that he was still poking his son's bare belly. He immediately jerked his hand backward like it was hotter than the burning sun. Minato took a shaky step backward, his eyes darting around the room until they landed on something that disturbed his racing thoughts. The end of a familiar scroll was jutting out from under Naruto's pillow. Minato almost averted his gaze to finally leave the room when something else caught his attention. The edge of the scroll was rolled down a centimeter, obviously open. Minato's eyes immediately started to look over the room, his gaze suddenly filling with things he had until now disregarded. A bunch of photos were tidily placed under the bed lamp, secured with the shattered fabric of a second Hitai 8 whose metal plate still shined under the piles of photos. The Hokage tossed his drumming shame to the side, grabbed the photos and sank down next to the bed, turning the bed lamp just a little to have more light. A small smile lurked on the edge of his mouth with the first photo. A team picture. 3 children in front of an adult Kakashi. The next one was another team picture. Naruto on the side, a short black-haired and almost unnaturally pale boy with a strangely forced empty smile, and Sakura in the middle. Flipping over the pile, there were more pictures like that. Pictures from Shinobi all over the 5 nations. He spotted a girl from IWA, a group photo from Suna, and even a guy from Kumo. He slowly put the pictures back the shelves, his gaze darting over the untidy room until he found another interesting thing. A thick, worn notebook with vibrant orange cover. Sloppy handwriting shouted its owner's identity. Minato furrowed his brow as his azure pools traced over Naruto's name once more. His childish and untidy handwriting had changed as his calligraphy skills excelled. He played with a shameful thought for a long minute. Stealing someone's diary sounded utterly childish. But still. Minato bit down on his lip, twisting the temptation once more over in his head. Yeah. Childish. He repeated in his mind. His eyes drifted once more toward the orange cover. Utterly childish. Minato shook his head and furrowed his brows. He'll tell me. He'll tell me once he thinks it is okay. His line of thoughts were disturbed by the bed sheet's soft ruffling. Naruto stilled, his until now peaceful expression twisting as he muttered, "Sasuke. Don't." Minato peeked over his shoulder at his son, observing as his expression changed from time to time. From disappointment, to rage, to pain until it finally settled down into a deep, troubled frown. "Bastard," he hissed this time. The Hokage glanced back at the notebook beside him. His mind drifted back some days ago, to the night of Naruto's confession. When he fled from the room to get away from Naruto's pleading blue eyes. He was so afraid back then. Afraid of himself, afraid of his own powerlessness. That he wouldn't be able to give the necessary reassurance to the son that he was pleading for. He was burying himself in the deep and dark pit of anxiety he himself dug. He had even lied to Naruto. He had gone home for a short time to stand next to Kushina's sleeping body, silently watching over her dream. Only to reassure himself that at least she was still there for him, that she hadn't disappeared during that roller coaster he suddenly found himself on. Minato went over Naruto's every small slip, his every failure. The night when he had introduced him to Kushina. The time when he had called him Dad, awaking from his nightmare. The desperate way he clinged on his clothes like a child would do to their. Minato drifted back to the memories he had witnessed an hour before. He must have been alone during his childhood. Because he was dead, because Kushina was dead. Kakashi? He played with the idea beforehand that if something happens to them, Kakashi would look over Naruto. But he was also a child, shattered in his soul. He was naive. Utterly naive. And Sarutobi? He had a village to look after. Jiraiya? Where the hell had Jiraiya been all these years? Minato violently shook his head. His teacher was a good shinobi, a good friend. He would definitely not abandon his child without something building in the background. At that time, his eyes drifted toward his wife's still form, wandering toward her round belly. He hesitantly reached out, resting his palm on the warm bulge, enjoying its rhythmical raise and fall until something poked his palm. Minato stiffened, not moving even a finger. Then again. There. Was that faint poke once more. His lips turned up into a soft smile at the third time. It was his son, knocking on life's door. His thoughts wandered back to the present and Minato made his decision. Was it right? Was it bad? He didn't care, because he still knew nearly nothing about his son. His past. His future. Our future. He needed to know who was lurking behind that mask. With a fast motion, he snatched the book and strolled out of the room. Minato settled down to an armchair in the living room, his wife and son peacefully sleeping upstairs. The first beams of the rising sun would soon paint everything into the mixture of vibrant orange and girlish pink, but the Hokage disregarded it. So, too, did he toss his rising remorse to the side. He let out a calming exhale, defiantly glaring the still-closed orange cover in his lap. On a whim, Minato suddenly flipped it, letting it open at a random page, somewhere near the middle. His eyes drifted over the words with a small smile. It was a mix about a day's training schedule and a to-do list. Asking Kakashi-sensei about his stupid lighting jutsu, ask Pa for more kunai, taijutsu lesson with Hyuga Hayashi at 4. And the list went on with one or more stupid things included. His gaze stopped at a sentence. The notebook soon turned into a real diary on the next page. Regret. It was so obvious in his eyes now that I think back. He did regret all those things he did to the whole ninja world. Toby. He was ashamed of himself. Not like Madara. I could have saved him. I know. If I had the opportunity, I would have been able to save him. Toby. He repeated the name in his mind continuously, rolling it over and over for long minutes until he almost went crazy over it. Toby, he whispered into the room and shook his head. An anagram. Toby. Toib. I bought. Oit. Otib. Oitb. Obit. Minato suddenly froze, and so did his body. His eyes widened, the air in his lungs coming to a halt, and his heart skipped a beat. Obit, he whispered. Obit, oh. Before Naruto stilled and rolled to the other side of the bed one last time, the orange-covered diary was back in its previous place. The blonde slowly cracked his eyelids open as an impudent sunbeam slipped through the heavy curtain's gap to land directly on his closed eyes. It happily bounced on his face, disturbing his formerly peaceful sleep. An annoyed groan bubbled out of him when his eyelashes slowly fluttered open, and the beam stabbed into his irises. Naruto immediately turned, covering his whole head with his best weapon against the sun, his pillow. However, soon something cold and wet intruded under his warm cover. Naruto peered out from his shelter, tracing back the thin, black line to the source, a toppled ink bottle. He immediately bolted from his bed only to land face down on the hard wooden floor. With an annoyed grunt, he slowly rose, nursing his throbbing forehead before snatching the almost empty bottle to put it back in its proper place. Under his night lamp. His eyebrows crinkled when he noticed that something was off. He was pretty sure that he hadn't switched it off, but the light bulb was definitely dark now. Scratching his head, he shrugged off the dilemma, before heading into the bathroom, grabbing a towel from his chair on the way. Who cared? He had more important things to concentrate on. For example, breakfast. Our time traveler happily munched his early breakfast. His mother sat at his right, his father opposite to them. The sweet smell of freshly baked pancakes lingered around his nose, then moved further until it reached every single corner of the house, only to turn back where it came from with increased power. His lips instantly turned upward when the smell stroked his nostrils once more. It was as he had always imagined. Having a real family and enjoying breakfast together. Sharing small smiles, chatting about general things. Having Jiraiya's face plastered on their window with a goofy smile. What? An annoyed grunt sneaked out from Naruto as his godfather leaned closer to the glass, his skin touching the surface, and to add more to the already abstract scene, he started knocking on it continuously. A low growl bubbled out from Kushina as Minato let out a sigh, strolling to the window to let in their newest companion. I hope it's important, Kushina hissed between her clenched teeth, threateningly fingering the handle of a sharp knife as the toad summoner hopped next to her, already grabbing a dry piece of toast. Of course it is, Jiraiya assured her, simultaneously spraying crumbs across the table, to Kushina's displeasure. Her grip tightened around the handle, something that didn't go unnoticed by Minato. To save the day or most likely the Sennin's balls he stepped in. Why are you here, sensei? The named man finished his toast with a loud gulp and oiled his dry throat with a sip of coffee that he had snatched out from under Minato's nose. To steal my godson and... Clearing his throat, he finished the whole cup before continuing. And you? So, where are we going now? Naruto demanded. His only answer was a mischievous smile. Minato glanced at his son with a raised eyebrow but received only a shrug from him. With a sigh, the Hokage rose from his seat. And what do you want to do with us at that place? You'll know soon. But first, I have a little present for my godson. Now, shoo. He grinned and waved a dismissive hand at his former student, all of his attention now glued on Naruto. In the next blink, a small package was in front of the time traveler, wrapped in plain brown paper. Narrowing his eyes, he hesitantly reached out for his present. Not that I'm not flattered, but you've never been the giver type. First the summoning contract, then this? Why all these presents all of a sudden? A sour smile spread across Jiraiya's face, averting his eyes from the questioning blue ocean. I'm trying to make up for lost time, he murmured to the table. Naruto eyed his silent godfather for a second before his fingers slipped under the paper, slowly tearing it open. A blindingly colored something blinded him for a moment. Blinking out his surprise, he tore away the whole wrapping with a heavy snap, revealing the contents, something that made his mouth drop, and an invisible force stung his eyes. Naruto hesitantly unfolded the package with trembling fingers, slowly lowering its content into his lap. What is it? Kushina curiously asked, leaning above her son's shoulder, but as soon as she spotted her relative's distant expression, she retreated back to Minato's side. Naruto silently sat, but his soul was far away from the heart of Konoha while gently stroking the familiar fabric. He ran his fingers along the black side, then played with the zipper, listening to the familiar noise it made. He drifted away from his village towards distant lands, into his memories about a small shop where he had originally received the same-looking, orange pullover. He hadn't been more than 14 when he had first glanced at his mirror image to lock his gaze on the same black pattern on both sides of the zipper. His hand clenched into a fist around the fabric, as he clung to the memory, before he had had to deal with the weight of the world, when he had been able to laugh carefree. Almost carefree, he corrected himself. You don't like it. The toad wrinkled his nose in disappointment. Naruto blinked back to reality from his stupor, and he slowly raised his head to meet with Jiraiya's worried eyes. No, I love it. Thanks, Naruto quickly reassured him, immediately wrapping it around his shoulders, his previously blank expression gone and replaced with a wide grin. But now I have to find orange trousers too to complete the attire, you know. He poked his black slacks and sent a cheeky smile to his father. Orange? Kushina raised an amazed eyebrow, but in the next second, she was next to her son to land a smacking kiss on his cheek. So what came from Konoha's yellow flash and the red-hot habanero? The orange what? A small, nostalgic smile pulled Naruto's lips upward as he slowly rose and tugged on his vibrant, orange attire. Konoha's orange Hokage, Dadabayo. The three men silently strolled along the thin path toward the edge of the village, following the curves of the dirt road that led them toward their mysterious destination. They passed several training grounds, and they were already far from the last numbered one. The path led them deep into the woods, under the shadows of ancient trees that were old enough to have seen the Shodai's or even his grandfather's first steps. Naruto glanced at the back of his godfather as he led them further and further into the wilderness. He took a suspicious glance at a hollow tree they had passed when the dead leaves rustling echoed inside the empty shell of the once royal oak. In the next second, his face softened as a small rabbit dashed across the path as soon as it thought it would be safe enough. I've received news from AIM, Jiraiya suddenly stated, making both blondes pause on their way. Naruto immediately whirled around to face with his godfather, his eyes wide, gaping like a fish out of water. As the perfect opposite to Naruto's reaction, Minato gradually turned and raised an eyebrow at the sage, silently demanding the rest of the news. However, Jiraiya wasn't eager to just burst out with the rest. He took his sweet time, drawing out the moment and with it the tension until Naruto was ready to tear out his golden locks in his frustration. Or kick Jiraiya hard enough to go flying and land in the middle of AIM, preferably in front of his spy's door. Or in the middle of a female bathhouse filled with angry women. Of course, none of these happened as the rest of the information came with the sage's next exhale. Danzu is dead. Shursui is on the way to Konoha together with the remains of Root. Naruto sucked in a harsh breath before his godfather continued. It seems Hanzo got rid of him because of a mysterious shinobi, who appeared from nowhere, ruined an important meeting, and Danzu and his minions were accused of treason. Jiraiya sent an accusing glance towards Naruto, who somehow couldn't shake off the urge to avert his gaze. Speaking of which, he continued. Why the hell were you in AIM? Naruto gulped and stayed in the safety of silence for several long moments. Bracing himself, he straightened his composure and faced with two pairs of demanding eyes. To save Yahiko and Nagato. Suffocating silence followed his announcement. Only the thick woods fauna continued its ballad over their heads to ease away some of the tension that was gathering around Jiraiya. Then, it stopped as soon as it had come as the sage had let out the exhale he until then couldn't get rid of. But they're dead. No, they aren't. Naruto shook his head. In my timeline, Danzu and Hanzo ambushed them during that meeting. Yahiko killed himself to save the others, and that was the day Pain was born. Nagato lost himself. But this time, they're safe and sound. But that can't be. Naruto raised an eyebrow at his vehemently protesting teacher, silently observing the reaction. But it was Minato who asked the until then unspoken question. Why are you so adamant that they're dead? Yeah, how would you know that? Naruto blurted out, crossing his arms. Jiraiya stayed in silence, his gaze fixed on the land under his feet, stubbornly repeating the same sentence like an insolent child. They're dead. They died before the war ended. He finally raised his head to stare into the younger skeptical pools and hardened his gaze. I am a spy master. I have been a spy master since I knew my chakra nature. Naruto's brows furrowed as the white-haired man narrowed his eyes and collected his memories. I wanted to go back to AIM after the Second Shinobi War had ended to check on them, but then Hanzo was in charge, and the nation was already under a heavy blockade. No one could get in or out. But I didn't give up. I had sent a toad into the hideout we had built together. It was completely destroyed, and our markers were in dash. Jiraiya suddenly snapped his mouth shut and gritted his teeth. I'm an idiot. Naruto narrowed his eyes, stepping closer to the suddenly silent sage. What happened? I received a message about the death of 3 shinobi who fought to bring peace. And one of them possessed the Rinnegan. From who? Minato finally stepped into the circle, but he received no answer for a long and tensed moment. I never knew the sender, Jiraiya whispered. And you believed it? Just like that? Naruto snapped and moved to grab Jiraiya's shoulder to shake it, but Minato's hands on his own stopped him from finishing the motion. The blonde made a side glance at his father, who was slowly shaking his head. Leave it, he said without words. Letting out an annoyed grunt, Naruto folded his arms in front of his chest and took a step backward. Nobody said another word for a lengthy while, each man too occupied with his own thoughts, Naruto silently cursing his godfather's naivete, Jiraiya wordlessly whipping himself for his own foolishness, while Minato was rolling the events over his head several times until something clicked. Why? Both men snapped their heads back to the loudly wondering Minato. Why would someone want you to believe they're dead? No answer came for another long section until Naruto suddenly paled. The Rinnegan, he whispered and explained further as suddenly he was in the middle of attention. He wanted to separate Nagato. That bastard Madara still kept an eye out on his own. His own, Minato repeated confusedly, and Naruto was more than eager this time to clear some parts of his past. Nagato's eyes aren't his own. They belong to Madara, and he somehow transplanted them into Nagato while he was little. In the future, he desperately wanted them back. Nagato should have used a reanimation jutsu on Madara with the Rinnegan, but instead he was resurrected by the Edo Tensei. A slip in his plans. He was immortal and invulnerable, but that state wasn't good enough to become the Jubi's Jinchuriki. Naruto clenched his hands into fists, anger flooding in his veins, fogging his mind. Jiraiya blinked and immediately glanced at his once student in the hope that he'd be able to provide the explanation that Naruto seemingly wouldn't give. Minato shot a quick, telling glare at him in reply. Something that seemed very much like, "I'll tell you later." Slowly nodding, Jiraiya retreated a step backwards. Minato's brows connected into one coherent line under his forehead protector. The Jubi. He was fortunate to understand what Naruto was talking about. It seemed that stealing his diary wasn't a bad idea. Naruto's building rage suddenly stopped before it could escalate into burning fury as it disappeared after Kurama flicked a single tail. Concentrate, brat. The messenger is the only thing that matters now. It could have been only one man. Letting out a breath together with his frustration, Naruto clicked his tongue in displeasure. "You're right." The blonde narrowed his eyes, disregarding the curious glances around him. "The messenger is the key to solving this puzzle," he mused loudly. Madara could only have sent out Zetsu. He had no one else beside him during that timeline. "Maybe," Minato whispered, casting a sly glance at his son. No other words were exchanged as they were silently thinking over the new revelations. They continued their way toward their destination. It wasn't a long walk, thank Kami, the awkward silence was suffocating for all of them. They finally rounded a thick bush to face their final goal. A lonely, long-forgotten training ground greeted Naruto. No one else was around. Only the fauna clattered inside the untouched nature. Jiraiya strolled to the center of the clearing and plucked a small scroll from his pocket. The youngest suspiciously eyed his godfather's slow movements as he rolled the fine paper open and smoothened the small wrinkles on the yellowish fabric. Finally, Jiraiya glanced up to meet two pairs of questioning eyes. "What?" he asked half-heartedly with a cheeky glint in his eyes. His only answer was two raised pairs of eyebrows. Naruto wrinkled his nose with displeasure and a small amount of uneasiness. Only one glance at the seal's design was more than enough for him to recognize his own handiwork, the fine strokes, the way he always curled some typical parts of certain characters. Thousand sleepless nights flashed in front of his eyes, the uncountable memories of his clones as they exercised the kanji, swirls, symbols on every available surface. It was one of his first works here in the past, one of his finest barriers that concealed anything and everything. No noise, no scent nor any trace of chakra was able to escape its isolation. He had made it to protect his people from the cursed Sharingan user. Blinking away his memories, Naruto glanced up at his father. They didn't need to exchange any words, they both knew what was going to happen next. Jiraiya cleared the amused grin from his face, and with a flicker of his chakra, the barrier came to life around the two blondes, separating them from the Sannin. He slowly nodded and settled down cross-legged, his eyes carefully glued inside the purple glow. Two blondes stood straight in the middle of a faintly purple barrier. Each carefully breathed as their eyes narrowed, silently scrutinizing each other. A gust of wind grabbed Naruto's hair, playfully tugging his locks, ruffling his clothes, and his gaze snapped to focus on a lonely leaf that had innocently floated into his sight. The autumn sun glinted on its crimson edge, and for a moment, time has paused, and the details increased. The streaks were sharp, and all of autumn's warm. Colors were suddenly there, the golden yellow, the vibrant orange and the rich, ruby red. All the flaming sun's vigor, endless power and royal serenity, both opposites compressed into one tiny, little, fragile leaf. Another gust of wind, a blink and the small miracle was gone. Together with his father. Naruto immediately hurled around, a kunai already in hand to block the incoming attack on his torso. Two blades met with a high cling, but while the steel's vibration reached Naruto's palm, Minato was already in his previous place, carefully observing his slowly turning sun. Minato furrowed his brow at the other side of the purple barrier. His scowl deepened when the blonde didn't move as he swept his leg to the side on the soft grass to have better footing. However, in the next second, he had to dodge a sneaking clone that rushed out of the ground to grab his knees. And with that motion, hell broke out on the clearing. Blonde devils rushed over the place, ready to beat the crap out of Minato, who desperately kicked and hit every appearing clone he found within his reach to escape from the whirling hurricane. Once, he even tried to bite. It was a childish but successful attempt to get rid of a clone by biting down on an arm that had suddenly tried to choke him from behind. With a surge of chakra, Minato triggered his technique to teleport himself to the farthest available point in the blocked area. He was finally able to get a lungful of air after delivering a well-aimed punch to a stowaway and dismissed the clinging clone. However, he had no time to rest. A lonely copy charged at him, fiercely trying to distract the Kage with all of the willpower he could gather and solidify into a salvo of punches. Minato made a disapproving growl and aimed at the buzzing clone's face with a kunai that suddenly appeared in his palms. Minato let his grin grow as his target's blue eyes widened, hands coming up instinctively to defend his head from the unavoidable attack. It was too fast for any living person to even follow the motion, not to mention dodge it, except one, the attacker himself. Or at least until then, he thought so. In the next heartbeat, Minato froze, his hand still grabbing the handle of the weapon as it, instead of disappearing inside the dispelling clone's leftover chakra-enchanted dust, suddenly stopped as it hit something different. Something solid. Something living. Naruto let out a low growl and tightened his grip on the frozen kunai, crimson essence dripping on the green grass under the tensed duo. Minato narrowed his eyes, and another weapon slipped into his other palm, disregarding his son's flowing blood. Both of them knew that this duel would end differently than the previous ones. A flicker of his chakra and he reached for the marker at his son's back to be there a blink later. However, before he could launch his attack, something else suddenly happened that stopped Minato as another power rose from under his son's skin, stopping the weapon in midair, knocking the weapon out from his hand. It flashed only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough to burn a white orb in the middle of Minato's vision. The Kage, this time, leaped away to gain some space between them, suspiciously eyeing his opponent. Naruto shot an annoyed grimace at his still bleeding palm, then shook his hand to get rid of the irritating wet feeling. Narrowing his eyes, the time traveler lowered his center of gravity just slightly into an unfamiliar stance. Letting out a calming exhale, Naruto did the most unbelievable act one could have made facing the fastest shinobi walking on the earth. He closed his eyes and stilled. Minato stared at his relative for some time, his gaze flickering to his open palm where he had grabbed the kunai's blade to stop it. His muscles tensed as the until then well-hidden part of his son slowly surfaced. It almost burned his senses, not because of its intensity, but because of the sheer heat it was emitting. The Kyuubi's chakra was potent and restless, wriggling under Naruto's skin as it came to life, crawling its way until it settled down around the wound. He could literally see as the tissues knitted together and as new skin was growing to shroud the previously open gash. The light breeze tickled Minato's skin over his tensed muscles. Sweeping his legs farther apart, he suddenly charged, disregarding his safety for a second. Whatever his son was planning, he wouldn't let him finish it. It was too dangerous. He was strong, much stronger than he had ever imagined. Setting back his arm and aiming a punch directly at Naruto's face, Minato launched his attack, but it didn't reach his son once again. He leaned to the right to avoid the counterattack, satisfied as the hit passed beside his cheek. Then he felt it on his face. It was like a hard slap but with enough force to knock him off balance, and he stumbled across the field until he finally found his footing, none too gracefully. The Kage's eyes suddenly widened as he finally gazed at his son's face. His once sky-blue irises were glittering in a golden shade with horizontal pupils, and the unmistakable reddish marking was outlining his eyes. Sage mode. Raising an eyebrow, Minato lifted his hand to brush his stinging cheek. His son's posture was relaxed and confident, only his eyes shined with a well-subdued laughter while he coolly observed his father nursing his throbbing face. Minato couldn't help himself and let the proud smile spread across his features. "You're good." Naruto raised one single eyebrow and smirked. "Thanks. Now stop playing around." Minato let the proud smile transform into a sheepish grin, but it soon faded as his face became serious. They stayed motionless for some time once more, neither daring to make the first move because both felt that this time, everything would be different. This time, there would be no lying, no deceiving, and no holding back. And finally, there would be no turning back. There was an invisible pressure silently hovering above their heads, threatening their life like a guillotine above a condemned neck. In the end, they both settled into silent agreement. They nodded and bolted into action. And this time, they fought seriously. A dangerous jutsu flared to life between Naruto's hands as he thrusted his palm toward his father to catch him with his release. Sharp wind chakra howled toward the Kage. It shaved everything flat that barred its path, be it an ancient tree or a giant rock. Another jutsu came to life, a wall of wind bursting against the attack, fighting for the upper hand before failing. But the attempt wasn't fruitless. The two attacks extinguished each other, and their power soon disappeared, leaving behind nothing more than the faint scent of ozone. Meanwhile, the fighters didn't patiently wait for their turn. They punched and jumped, hurled and twisted. They kicked and cut, and a kunai's blade glinted in the sunlight like a playful wink. Hiration triggered continuously. Hundreds of three-pronged kunai laid all across the battlefield as safe landing points or as a start to an attack. On the other side, clones lay hidden beneath the surface or were disguised as rocks, bushes, or even kunai, ready to launch themselves at Minato. An ancient tree creaked, crying one last time under the pressure of a powerful jutsu before it cracked and tumbled to the side, burying its own youngsters under its branches. A golden pear blurred back to existence on the clearing as its last leaf stirred. Two Rasengan roared toward each other, dispersing no further than a hairline before they could collide. Both men's breathing was harsh, as their bodies had been pushed to the very edge, scratching their limits before they resorted to their aces. Finally catching his breath, Naruto narrowed his eyes and stilled once more, reaching out to the endless source around him to replace his fading senjutsu reserves. The world opened for him even more, despite the faintly glowing barrier. He was there, but he was also everywhere around Konoha. He could see and feel as his mother was gently stroking her round tummy, his own younger version unconsciously shifting inside to get closer to her warmth. He felt as Kakashi slipped into the ANBU headquarters, his movements as graceful and silent as a cat's. Suddenly shaking his head, Naruto pushed the currently distracting sensations to the side to focus entirely on his father. It lasted only for a second, nothing more, but this fraction could have easily cost him his victory. Minato, not aware of his son's small distraction, bit his thumb and slammed his hand onto the soft meadow to call for backup and disappeared inside the chakra-enchained cloud. The soft dust wasn't in a hurry to dissipate, but the filtering, harsh cough and the following argument pulled Naruto's lips upward into a sincere, nostalgic smile. "Brat! You became a Kage and forgot about us? Only call us when you're in need? Shut up, Pa. I'm sure he's got a good reason for not visiting us. Now, Minato-kan, where were you? Forgetting about your sensei? Not even visiting us for dinner? I'm really sorry for not visiting you, but I was really busy. You know, village stuff, Kushina's pregnancy and what? Kushina-chan is pregnant?" Naruto let out a chuckle when he heard the unmistakable noise of a hard slap on someone's crown, most likely Minato's. Something's never change. Who was that? Fukasaku whispered, after Naruto's chuckle finally died down inside the thick fog. The reason why I need your help. Why didn't you start with that, brat? Someone's attacking Konoha? Pa asked, voice alert. And no. I'm in the middle of a spar. You're taking things too seriously, Minato-can. Calling us for a simple spar. This time Shima spoke, her voice a little higher than what Naruto remembered. Wait. Can you feel it, Pa? This chakra signature? Someone's using senjutsu out there. That chakra. Brat, she suddenly snapped. You've taught Sennin mode to Kushina-chan. You know how dangerous it could be. Especially in her state. What were you thinking? That thing out there has a hell of a chakra signature. But I'm sure it's not Kushina-chan, Pa countered with a deep frown. At least, Naruto could imagine him frowning easily. Shima-sensei, Fukasaku-sensei. Please just concentrate, brat. We've got a fight to win, Shima snapped once more to finally end their bickering. The last of the soft dust cleared after a long, resigned sigh to reveal Minato's form with two smaller toads on each of his shoulders. Naruto's eyebrow rose as he noted Minato's similar appearance, the obvious marks of nature on his face, the same reddish markings, the same golden pupils as his own. His sage mode was perfect thanks to the elder pair who had already reached for the lingering senjutsu around them, luring it out from the grass, the trees, and even from the soil. Naruto cocked his head to the side and let the grin spread across his face. Well, that's news to me. I didn't know you were also a sage. Minato shrugged awkwardly with his two companions on his shoulders and mimicked the expression. I'm not that good with sage mode. Not as good as you but better than Jiraiya. It wastes too much time for me. I prefer Hiraishin to this. But... His grin faltered, and his expression hardened. But, it seems I have to use everything I've got up my sleeves to beat you. An amused snort escaped from the younger of the two. You're good and fast, but you won't be able to beat me. I won't hold back this time. Fukasaku narrowed his eyes. So much confidence. You're Minato-can's brother, aren't you? Where did you learn the sage arts, brat? Ah, well, it was Naruto opened his mouth to say more, but Minato's casual wave stopped him. We can chit-chat later, Fukasaku-sensei. We've got some serious business. Naruto eyed his father for some time before nodding, silently. Thanking him for saving him from what would probably have been a lengthy explanation. The less people knew about where he really was from, the better, even Ma and Pa. And, they were actually family. They had given him and hundreds of others much-needed shelter, they had given them a roof to lay under and food, and most importantly, they had given them hope that not everything was lost, that Madara couldn't touch them in that small, safe paradise. It gave his heart a pang, but he knew the distraction was necessary. They'd have time to build up the same bonds. He would make sure of it. Believe it. Naruto let the wide smile erase the previous, sour grimace from his face and moved to a very familiar stance, to the basic pose of the frog Kumite. Pa raised an eyebrow, and his lips turned upward. You're Jirayakan's pupil. I would recognize that influence of our basic stance from 1,000. Our time traveler let out a low chuckle, broke the stance and scratched the back of his head. Yeah. Ero Sennin taught me 1 or 2. But even under the slight embarrassment, Minato could see the pride, feel the honor and the gratitude as his son stole a glance at the named sage, still sitting cross-legged on the other side of the barrier, his eyes focused entirely on him and only on him. Soon all eyes were glued on the Sennin. Jiraiya grinned and waved to them both playfully, encouraging them to continue their battle. Right, Ma agreed, her eyes stuck on their opponent, who, just like a good pupil, moved back to his previous form. The toads shared a glance and launched into action side by side with Minato. A Rasengan appeared in Minato's hand, this time forged from senjutsu, and it continued to grow until it was bigger than himself. Naruto let out a growl from somewhere deep inside himself as he had to duck and roll to avoid another attack. His father was deadly, even without Sage Mode. Kurama, he thought, and the Bijuu's reply was instantaneous. Golden chakra flared under his skin and edged closer to the surface until it finally reached its limit and exploded into flapping, golden flames, overwhelming everything else. The inhuman power gently, almost tenderly embraced him, soothing his protesting muscles and fueling his almost drained reserves. The village leader narrowed his eyes and almost opened his mouth to voice his awe, but his motion faltered as their eyes met for a moment. It perfectly ruined his mood to praise his relative. Determined red eyes glowed in the sunlight with a power that could move or demolish whole mountains. Naruto was dead serious this time. So, he shut his mouth. A small smile still found its way toward Minato's lips before he launched into action once more. Jutsu after jutsu struck, razor-sharp wind chakra howled, electricity chirped, and golden flames of pure energy roared. Naruto tensed his muscles, and whispering an almost silent, "Sorry," he dispersed the two old toads with a well-aimed touch of their necks. From a chakramade arm. A flicker of chakra into their systems was more than enough to distract the summon and force out an instant reverse summoning. Minato immediately whirled around, but this time he was too slow. Naruto was on his heels with a Rasengan in his hand. The Kage darted, and their forms blurred from time to time until they finally separated. Naruto looked smug this time, a foxy grin on his face, his breathing only slightly faster than normal. Minato swept his legs further apart, readying himself for the upcoming attack. And it came with his own speed. He could see nothing more than a yellow flash before, in the next heartbeat, he felt the ice-cold touch of a blade at his jugular. His son nicked his neck to wait his victory, and Minato could have sworn that he was grinning from ear to ear. "It's over, Dad." A sly smirk spread across the Kage's face, and Naruto somehow sensed the approaching danger, so he prepared his muscles. Minato reached out for his own marker. It was easy to feel it as it pulsed with the rhythm of his son's heartbeat. Not rushed but not really slow, somewhere between the two, slightly faster than his own. A single muscle tensed deep inside Minato's stomach, and he was gone. Their positions flipped as this time, Naruto's throat was exposed to a kunai's sharp blade. "It's over only when I say so," he playfully teased, leaning closer to his son's ears so only he could hear his low voice. Naruto let out a sound, something between a sigh and a chuckle. He slowly raised his hands in a motion that most would take as the universal sign of surrender, but Minato knew better. His son was far from giving up. Another power rose once again under his son's skin, familiar and warm. It continued to grow until it perfectly blended with the Kyuubi's chakra, and it took a moment for Minato to realize what this familiar feeling was. It was nature, the limitless senjutsu that suddenly circulated everywhere. The flora around them twitched. The remains of the devastated forest creaked, and the last surviving leaves quivered at the edge of the barrier before, suddenly, the burgeons snapped, and new branches grew in seconds to resuscitate the once majestic forest. Naruto looked over his shoulder, their gazes met, and Minato took a step backward from his son when the power flashed up inside him once more. The golden fire flared around Naruto, his chakra dazzling him for a second, before his vision cleared. It was glowing and pulsing and flipping and blazing. Naruto pupils flickered between fox-like slits and toad-like horizontal eyes, eventually morphing together into one united black cross. Minato this time let his mouth drop open in astonishment. Then gravity stoutly pulled his still raised arm with the kunai in hand and he submitted himself to its power, letting his hands fall limply to his side. His mind was empty, too shocked to try to find words to describe his raging emotions. He continued to stare until Naruto's narrowed gaze loosened and his son raised a questioning eyebrow. The Kage braced himself and took a step back toward his son to whisper into his ears. You surpassed the Yondaime Hokage. Your father is proud of you beyond words. He paused once more, his own face softening. And me, too. Naruto stiffened, hands frozen awkwardly in the middle of the motion. Minato hesitantly waited for a response that never came. Pausing for another heartbeat, the Hokage licked his lips and continued. But, you were foolish. You hid your real identity from me. You hid your feelings, and I still don't understand all of your motives, but... Minato shut his mouth with an audible snap and let in a deep breath from the fresh air, and his tension lessened by a fraction. With an exhale, his stiff muscles loosened after the small motion, and his voice mellowed with warmth. But your current actions disappoint me. Opposite to Minato's relaxing body, Naruto stiffened, his muscles screaming in protest to the sudden strain. Guilt and shame burned up the remaining part of his rational mind that still wanted to argue, to protest that his father was wrong, but this time he forced down his stubbornness, let it lay subdued where it was. The Kage gulped down his own remorse over Naruto's inner turmoil and didn't stop to give him time to process his ruthless words. It had to be done. I understand that you were trying to keep us safe and sound from the very beginning, even before you knew who you were. You've placed everything else ahead of your own well-being. You think that your duty is to shoulder the world's burden all on your own. And that was foolish. You're powerful, but you have been acting like a green genin out of the academy. You were Kakashi's student. You've forgotten your first lesson as a ninja. Tell me, my son. What's the most important thing for a shinobi? His father's demanding tone made him flinch, and he couldn't shake off the feeling of the searching blue eyes on his back. Naruto gradually lowered his still raised hands, and he let them fall limply to his side. His shoulders hunched. His head suddenly felt too heavy with the unbearable density of shame to uphold its weight, so he gave up fighting against the gravity and let it slump on his chest. He stayed motionless for an awkward minute and licked his lips that were suddenly drier than the dunes in Suna. The most important thing for a shinobi is teamwork. He heard as Minato let out a humming sound in satisfaction, and when gentle hands landed on his shoulders to turn him around, he let them guide him until he was face to face to his father. He still hadn't raised his head from the ground. Who's in your team now, son? You. Mom. Jiraiya. Kakashi, he obediently answered like a good student to his teacher. Minato placed a finger under his chin to force his head up and finally tore Naruto's guilty gaze from the soil. Blue eyes bore into his own in uncertainty. Your team wants to help you. Why are you still fighting against it? Let us help you. Naruto didn't answer, nor reacted beside a wince. Minato sighed and turned toward his last resort. He didn't want this conversation to be like this, but it seemed he had to crack his son's stubbornness with force. I knew about Obito, and it hurts. It hurts more than I can even describe, to know how much pain he's inflicted upon you. I want to help. Let me help you. He studied his face for a second, before continuing. Please. This finally forced Naruto out of his locked shell. His father's pleading voice was like a kunai stabbing into his heart. He didn't answer immediately, instead squeezing his eyes shut and gritting his teeth to channel down his raging emotions. It was a hard decision to make. Tossing his previous intentions to the side and endangering the lives of others involving them in a fight that wasn't even theirs, or sticking to his original plans and trying to handle everything alone. But he had already dragged them along his way. He sunk back to his very core where Kurama had silently observed the exchange. Naruto glanced up at his partner in his own wordless version of a request, but this time no help came from the fox. It shook its head and retreated to the shadows. This decision is his and only his to make. He watched as the last leaf stilled on a tree and left his seal with a sigh. He cracked his eyes open and was lost in his father's searching blue gaze. And he found his answer there. A small smile tugged his lips upward, his posture straightened as a big chunk of his burden suddenly leaving his shoulders. For the first time in years he was freed from his encumbrance. Because, for the first time since he had gotten there, he was not alone, and he finally understood it, really understood it. He felt it under his skin, in his pores, in his very core that he wasn't alone anymore in this fight. "Help me." Naruto exhaled softly. "Help me, please. I don't know what I should do." When he looked to his father, unbridled emotion shined through. The eyes are the mirrors of the soul, and that was exactly how Minato suddenly felt himself, looking into his son's unblinking stare, gazing into a mirror that showed Naruto's true self, with his every emotion finally uncovered for the first time, his posture straight without the burden he had chosen to carry on his shoulders, and finally he was able to see the trust in his eyes. Not the faint, formless shadow of it as it had been before, but this time he could see real, unconditional trust. Blinking once, Minato tried to readjust his eyes and tear his sight from the bright, blinding emotion, but he caught a glimpse of another scene that captivated his gaze. His own face's reflection was staring back at him in his son's blue eyes, with the same flaming faith reflecting from his own identical orbs. A pair of strong arms pulled them suddenly closer and into a fierce hug. Blinking out his stupor, Minato glanced at the widely grinning Toad. Summoner, and he caught a glimpse as the last shards of the faint purple barrier dissolved into thin air. "You idiots," Jiraiya muttered, tightening his grip around the two blondes. "Sometimes this is the only way you can really understand each other. Fighting." Naruto let out a snort and squeezed his godfather's arms but restrained the cheeky comment what was about to slip out. Instead he murmured a low, "thanks," into Jiraiya's shoulders. The air in Minato's private study in the Hokage mansion was as heavy as the attendant's mood. Naruto's brows were furrowed, and his features mirrored an unusually serious expression as he stared at the giant map of the elemental nations on the wall, wheeling a small red pin between his fingers. He took a step closer and pushed the pin into the faint mark of a small city in the middle of the land of iron. "Here. Obito showed up in front of me at the inn during the Kage summit." "Exactly when?" Jiraiya asked, a small, red paper tag in his hands. The time traveler narrowed his gaze in concentration and trailed into the middle of the room, eyes traveling up to the ceiling where a web of colorful strings were attached to almost every corner of the small room. Each one represented a shinobi, and at every point where their roads met, the cords were tied together, creating a web-like pattern. Naruto trailed his fingers along the vicious red cord and stopped ere it was connected with several others. An important event, an intersection in Naruto's future timeline, what they were currently trying to remodel. A small paper tag hung from the node with the mark of Kage Summit. Exactly during the summit while Zetsu and Sasuke were dealing with the 5 Kage. Naruto let go of the stings, letting them twang, and reached for the end of an orange cord to tie it to the red one. Sarutobi let out a breath and slowly shook his head. "This is already too complicated. I still don't get why we're doing this," Naruto muttered, folding his arms and glaring at a place where several cords met and ended, but his own sprung. Slowly unfolding his tangled limbs, he placed his hand on the orange line, and followed it into the middle of the room until he reached the jam he was glaring at with a force that could turn it to ashes. Many stings ended there, but he selfishly disregarded most of them and fixed his gaze on two, a golden yellow, his father's thread of life, and another red one, paler but still cheerful, nothing like Obito's vicious and sinister crimson tone, his mother's thread of life. This was the event where the fates, the Parkas, ended hundreds of lives, ruthlessly terminating their lifespan with a simple cut after having measured the value of their lives on the night of the Kyuubi attack and his birth. Minato mirrored his predecessor and let out a sigh, slowly trailing his hand along the red string until he reached his frowning son in the middle of the room, his hand still attached to the intersection. He gently placed his own hand on his son's, careful to not rupture anyone's cord. "We are looking for connections between the events and the places, and this is our best chance to figure out Obito's whereabouts. He thinks he is smart, but he is still only a child. His moves are calculable around this time. He is the most active around his hideout, and we are closer and closer to find his exact location with every event and place you can recall. Naruto made a side glance at the map, running his eyes along the countless red pinheads as they concentrated at the north region of the land between Takigakure and the future Otogakure. And then what? I think we already know pretty accurately where he is. Naruto muttered, slipping his hand out from under Minato's to trail next to the map. Minato stubbornly followed his son to settle down beside him and pointed at the map. This place is known as the Mountain's Graveyard. Obito must be somewhere here. I can send troops there. Naruto hardened his gaze and shook his head. No. Obito is too powerful and obsessed with revenge. I don't want to involve people who have nothing to do with this. This is my fight. Minato narrowed his eyes and smacked his son. Nursing his throbbing crown, the Uzumaki quickly corrected himself. Okay. It's our fight. Happy now? No, but that's a bit better, Minato stated coldly and let out a sigh. He glanced over his shoulder when a snort stabbed the room and trailed back until his gaze met with a sneering blonde clone, who until now soundlessly observed as their timeline slowly evolved from nothing. The Hokage narrowed his gaze at the Kyuubi. And what is your opinion, Kurama-san? The Bijou stretched his borrowed face into a smirk and fluidly stepped next to the duo, passing the Sandame, who let out a shaky breath as their clothes brushed against each. I'll never get used to this, the old man muttered, rubbing his eyes. Kurama disregarded the old leader's remark and casually tossed his answer to Minato. It's either we hunt him down before, or we get him at Naruto's birth. We are well prepared for each version. We know every single detail of the birth, and I've also prepared my counterpart with them. I hated to be manipulated like a puppet. He won't let it happen this time. He will be prepared. Also, we are powerful enough to be able to get rid of Obito at his own doorstep if necessary. Naruto narrowed his eyes and spat at Kurama. I don't want to kill him. I want to save him. You can't make every single bad guy abandon their goals and save them from their own doom, you fool. You've already twisted this timeline so much that we can't be sure that Obito will attack on the night of your birth. You are risking your life, Minato's life, Kushina's life. I did it with Zabuza, I did it with Nagato, and you can bet on it that I will be able to talk some sense into his thick head if I get the opportunity. Deal with it, Naruto. You weren't able to do that in our own time. We have to be sure that this time he won't slip out from our grasp. He has to die. Kurama growled and shot a glance at Minato before continuing. For the sake of your family, for the sake of the future, for the sake of every shinobi on Earth, you can't let it happen again. Sometimes you have to believe in the greater good. We've already had this conversation. 1 or 100 lives for the lives of thousands. The lessening numbers change nothing. I won't follow that path, you can't save him, Naruto. Kurama snapped. But I know that I can do it this time. How? Kurama snarled and took a warning step toward the blonde. How can you be so sure of it? Your stubbornness is dangerous this time, you idiot. Because I saw it. Naruto picked up the gloves and took his own step toward his clone until their faces were inches from each other. Straightening his posture, he gained precious millimeters and rose above Kurama. I saw it in his eyes before he died. The shame. The regret. It was there. I wasn't imagining things. Kurama shut his mouth with an audible click, restraining the remark that was about to bubble out from him. Instead he focused on Naruto, eyes searching for something in the endless blue abyss that only he could see. His troubled frown morphed into a wide and satisfied smirk as he found it. You idiotic, stubborn, confident brat. Where have you been for all this time? Naruto blinked in confusion and stared at the fox for further explanation. When it didn't come, he grunted in frustration. What the hell are you talking about? Kurama didn't rush to answer, but the crimson eyes softened with a shade. Your confidence, he exhaled slowly, not leaving the thing he had found in Naruto's eyes, not even for a blink. Naruto stared at his companion for some time, his gaze and mind completely focused on Kurama, disregarding the tensely observing people around him. Kurama opened his mouth once more, and Naruto could feel his hot breath on his skin. Your confidence in the people around you. Your confidence in yourself. I thought you'd lost it during the war. The blonde continued to stare into the fox's unblinking eyes. Then, suddenly, he relaxed his gaze, his mouth slowly curving up into a wide, confident, and cheesy smile. So, what do you think we should do, Kurama? What do you want to do, Naruto? Kurama asked back. We're going to kick Obito's ass and pound some sense into his thick skull, Naruto answered, the same grin on his face. Jiraiya joined in the scene, an equally wide grin on his own face. That's my godson. Now, let's discuss the tactics. The sage grabbed Naruto's shoulder to guide him to another map on a table on the other side of the room. I'm glad you're back, the fox muttered, not audible to anyone else besides him. His eyes flickered toward Minato's silent figure as he eyed his son, Naruto enthusiastically explaining one of his awesome plans to Jiraiya. The fox's gaze traveled below Minato's eyes until it landed on the small smile on his face, and within a second, Minato sensed his eyes on him, and their gazes connected. Kurama unblinkingly stared back for some time, but his eyelids soon faltered, and he dipped his head in respect and gratitude to the suddenly stunned village leader. The demon didn't offer a second glance, though. He trailed to the other side of the room to join his partner. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.